Hello everyone, Coach Chris here with Wolf Moon Brewing. Time again for question of the week. This week the question comes in from an email. The email says, Coach Chris, in your video on creating a yeast starter, you mentioned that a foam stopper should be used in the flask. Why do you use a foam stopper and not a rubber stopper with an airlock? And then he has a note in there as well. Now, I'm not a microbiologist by any stretch of the imagination. I took one biology course in college. That by no means makes me an expert. But I do understand how the yeast cells work when they're put into a wort. And a yeast starter is in fact a wort. When the yeast is pitched or put into a wort, or in this case the yeast starter, they wake up from their dormant stage and they start their life cycle. The first step of their life cycle is that they take any of the dissolved oxygen that's in the wort, along with some of the sugars, and they grow, they strengthen their cell walls, and they multiply and divide by making more yeast cells. Since there's only a limited amount of dissolved oxygen in the wort, and even less in a small starter, like shown in those videos, we need to help out the yeast by getting more oxygen into the starter during its process. In order to do that, we use a foam stopper. That foam stopper allows the oxygen to come into the flask as it's depleted and used. As oxygen gets into the flask, whether you're using a stir plate or if you're manually shaking it, that shaking action or that stirring action allows the oxygen to dissolve back into the wort. If we used a rubber stopper and an airlock, we would greatly reduce the amount of oxygen available to the yeast, and therefore they wouldn't grow and multiply as much as we need them to do so in the yeast starter. So for a yeast starter, we use a foam stopper to allow oxygen to flow into the flask during the process so that we can get more oxygen dissolved into the wort, yeast starter, for the yeast so that they can continue to grow and multiply and be nice and strong for when we pitch the starter into our actual beer. I hope that's all made sense and that's answered your question. If you want some more clarification or if you have additional comments or questions, go ahead and leave them in the comment section below. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Hit the little bell to be notified anytime I post a new video. Now remember, homebrewing is really fun, but so is drinking responsibly. I'm Coach Chris, and we'll see you next brew.